He walked alone. No master, no home, no fear of death. He won more than 60 duels and never lost once. But his greatest battle was never against other swordsmen. It was against his own ego. Miyamoto Musashi didn't fight for honor. He didn't chase glory. He wanted to understand life, using the sword as his path. In this video, you're going to discover the true story of the samurai who faced death with wisdom. And maybe, by the end, you'll understand why the greatest fight of all is against yourself. Imagine being born into a world where peace is nothing more than a short break between two bloodbaths. That was the Japan Miyamoto Musashi came into, around 1584. The country was fractured, torn apart by centuries of civil war, with clans endlessly fighting for power in battles that rarely left survivors. A Japan ruled by uncertainty, fear, and the sword. And it was in this world of instability and steel that one of the greatest warriors in history was forged. Musashi never knew the safety of a normal childhood. From a very young age, he saw violence not as an exception, but as the rule. More than that, he learned that survival was a lonely art. There were no guarantees, no lasting protection. In a world where alliances fell apart like sandcastles, attachment was a dangerous luxury, and self-reliance a matter of life and death. An era forged by chaos. To understand Musashi, we need to look at the age he was born into, the end of the Sengoku period, the so-called Warring States era of feudal Japan. For almost 2 centuries, the archipelago lived in constant conflict between feudal lords, the daimyo, fighting for land, influence, and legitimacy. This political chaos broke down traditional social structures. Villages were looted, castles fell, and masterless samurai wandered from place to place like stray dogs. At any moment, anything you had could be taken away. Your belongings, your family, your name. It was a time when living with detachment wasn't some spiritual ideal. It was psychological survival. This was the world Musashi grew up in. He wasn't raised with lullabies, but with the sound of clashing blades. The smell of death didn't traumatize him. It trained him. The father who taught him to kill his father, Shinmen Munisai, was a master swordsman and strategist. From early on, Musashi was trained in the arts of war, kenjutsu, martial arts, and possibly even knife throwing and battlefield tactics. But this education didn't come wrapped in affection. It came with the coldness of someone who knew a single mistake could cost a life, and that compassion was often seen as weakness to be exploited. His father was both his teacher and a key reason for Musashi's emotional isolation. Between training and punishment, steel and sweat, what was being forged wasn't just a fighter, but a mind prepared for radical detachment. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus would later say, "It's not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about them." Musashi, still young, learned not to complain about pain, only to endure it. The birth of an idea, life is struggle. This environment shaped Musashi's unique view of life. To live is to fight, and not just in the literal, physical sense, but in every part of existence. For him, every human relationship carried risk. Every bond was a possible weakness. Not because he despised people, but because he understood, very early on, how unstable everything was. This early understanding brought him, even if unconsciously, close to the Buddhist idea of impermanence, mujo. Everything that is born is destined to disappear. Musashi didn't see combat as a choice, but as an inevitable condition. In this sense, his childhood connects with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, who centuries later would describe life as a constant will to power, a drive to overcome in the middle of chaos. Musashi didn't just adapt to a broken world. He faced it head-on, answering with discipline, with steel, with silence. The void. Not absence, but essence. But there is something deeper in Musashi's childhood than violence. The void, a concept that would become central in his philosophy, especially in his work, The Book of Five Rings, Go-Rin no Sho. where he dedicates the final chapter to the element void, Q. This void is not nihilism, it's clarity. For Musashi, the void is the inner space where there are no illusions, where the warrior meets himself fully, without distractions and without lies. We can imagine that this void began forming in him as a child. He never had time to build an identity grounded in affection, friendships, or stable routines. Everything was too unstable. His identity was shaped in the absence of stability, of safety, of permanence, and that absence turned into strength. Contrary to what many think, the void is not a hole, it's an invisible blade. It's an inner space where the mind can finally act with clarity, without being dragged around by wild emotions. Musashi understood this young, not through books, but through experience. And as an adult, he would turn that experience into philosophy. Self-reliance, not out of pride, but survival. It's important to understand. Musashi didn't pursue self-reliance as an ego move. He wasn't a loner out of vanity. Life itself taught him that depending on others was the fastest road to collapse. The instability of the Sengoku period showed him that alliances are fragile, promises break, and protectors die. Just as the Stoics preached inner independence, ataraxia, unshakable peace, Musashi developed his own version of that idea. But instead of meditating under Roman columns, he did it with a sword in his hand, under the unstable skies of a shattered Japan. As Seneca said, nothing is more honorable than a heart free of desire. Musashi walked a similar path. He didn't expect from others what he knew only he could build within himself. He didn't crave fame, wealth, or recognition. Above all, he sought to understand the way. Childhood as a spiritual training ground. Many people think philosophy is born only in libraries. But many great thinkers were shaped by pain, exile, and war. Just as Socrates was a soldier before becoming a giant of Western philosophy, Musashi was a survivor before becoming a master. His childhood wasn't just preparation for duels. It was the ground where he discovered the value of presence, focus, and clarity. When everything around you is falling apart, you learn to look inward. That's where real philosophy is born, in the eye of the storm, not in calm waters. Musashi was raised on the edge of the blade, not only the sword, but existence itself. Yes, he was born for conflict, but more than that, he turned conflict into a path, pain into wisdom, and the void into essence. And that's the great lesson his childhood leaves us. True strength doesn't come from physical power, but from the radical acceptance of impermanence. Musashi didn't just survive chaos. He absorbed it, understood it, and shaped it until it became a living philosophy. There are moments in a man's life that don't just change him. They rip him out of who he used to be. For Miyamoto Musashi, that moment came early. At 13 years old, holding a wooden sword, he faced and killed a grown samurai, armed and experienced. That wasn't just an early victory. It was a brutal awakening, a rite of passage where his childhood died with his opponent. That strike didn't wound only the man in front of him. It also cut through what was left of innocence in the young warrior's heart. This episode isn't just a historical detail. It carries deep symbolic and philosophical weight. It marks the beginning of a journey where the sword is not just a weapon, but a mirror. The fight is not just a clash, it's a path. Death is not an endpoint, it's a calling. From that duel on, Musashi started to see combat not as pleasure and not as duty, but as a harsh, necessary path to self-knowledge. A childhood cut by the sword, Musashi was born in 1584 into a Japan torn apart by internal conflict. The Sengoku era, the Warring States period, had turned the country into a permanent battlefield. The traditional values of Bushido, the way of the warrior, were tested every day. Men killed for honor, for power, or simply to survive. Children grew up with a sword in their hands and fear in their chests. Musashi was no exception. The son of a warrior, he grew up surrounded by training and violence. His childhood, if it ever truly existed, was brief. There was no space for naivety when the world around him was ruled by duels and clan disputes. At 13, still thin and young, he chose to accept the challenge of Arima Kihei, a samurai of the Shintoryu school who traveled through small provinces looking to prove his name. Kihei, a veteran, underestimated the boy. A fatal mistake. First blood. First void. Musashi faced him with an oak staff. No armor, no protection, and he won with overwhelming force, crushing Kihei's skull. The crowd, amused at first by the boy's boldness, fell silent. The child had killed a man. He was no longer a child, but he wasn't fully a man either. He had become something new, something between human and relentless. That moment echoed through Musashi's entire life. He didn't celebrate. He didn't run away. What happened there was more than a duel. It was his first direct contact with the power to kill, and at the same time with the burden of living with that power. In Eastern philosophy, especially Zen Buddhism, there is the idea of satori, a sudden moment of awakening. But satori doesn't always come through meditation or art. Sometimes it comes through the blade. Musashi had his satori at 13. He woke up, not to glory, but to the void. Killing to become someone we usually think killing always dehumanizes. But for Musashi, in that context, killing made him more human through pain. He realized that every fight would demand more than skill. It would demand soul, resolve, clarity. From that day on, he would never again step into a duel as if it were sport or vanity. Combat became a way of existing, a way of understanding the world, himself, and how fragile life really is. Over time, Musashi understood that the real battle was never against the opponent, but against the illusion of permanence within himself. Killing was not just about the other man's end. It was a confrontation with his own shadow. The one who sees himself in the moment of another's death awakens to the truth of the way. That's why, after this first duel, he didn't stop, but he also didn't lose himself. He didn't become a bloodthirsty killer. He became a relentless seeker. From then on, each duel was a mirror, a question thrown at the blade. Who am I in the face of death? Combat as self-knowledge. Musashi began to walk a path where the sword replaced the mirror. With every strike, he searched for something that wasn't outside, but inside. The fight exposed his courage, his hesitation, his limits. Through extreme risk, he saw himself more clearly. The adrenaline, the precision, death waiting just one mistake away. All of it became part of a ritual of clarity. Later, in the Book of Five Rings, he would write, "True victory is not over others, but over yourself. The one who conquers himself cannot be defeated by anyone." This way of thinking was born from that early experience. The first blood spilled wasn't only his enemies, it was the baptism of the warrior philosopher. Ethics without illusion. It's important to understand, Musashi didn't romanticize violence. He didn't fight for fun. He was driven by a deep sense of existential need. Combat was his way of meditating, of understanding. Instead of temples, he had roads. Instead of prayer beads, swords. His search was honest. He wanted to wake up. And the battlefield was the only place where he truly felt that was possible. It's no coincidence that he turned down ranks, titles, and comfortable positions. He chose to live as a wanderer, accepting challenges, but without bragging. Because his war wasn't against men, it was against ignorance. And the first step of that war happened at 13. Innocence sacrificed. The death of Arima Kihei wasn't just the start of his reputation. It was the end of his childhood. In that duel, Musashi sacrificed the softer, more fragile part of himself. The part that hesitates, that fears, that wants to avoid pain. And by doing that, he was reborn as someone who accepts pain as part of the way. It echoes a thought often linked to Nietzsche. The one who cannot sacrifice his innocence will never truly grow in spirit. Without knowing it, Musashi embodied this idea. He didn't have a choice. Life pushed him to the edge early. And instead of falling, he fought. Not only against a samurai, but against everything inside him that kept him from becoming whole. An awakening that shapes everything. What began in that duel would shape his view of art, strategy, aesthetics, and existence. In his philosophy, there is no room for half-truths. Every strike must be complete, every decision firm, every movement intentional. By killing at 13, he learned that living without intention is dying without meaning, and that living with intention means being willing to look death in the eyes and still move forward. That's why his life was never truly about killing. It was about learning to live as if every action could be the last. The first duel was not the beginning of endless war. It was the beginning of consciousness. In feudal Japan, refusing a lord was more than rebellion. It was a social death sentence. Society was strictly hierarchical, and loyalty to a master or clan was the backbone of the samurai code. Being a ronin, a samurai without a lord, was, for many, the same as disgrace. But Miyamoto Musashi chose this path consciously, not out of pride, not out of vanity, but out of philosophy. He refused to swear loyalty to any daimyo. He turned down easy alliances, prestigious positions, and promises of security. While others chased recognition, Musashi walked alone. And by doing that, he was shaping something much bigger than just a personal journey. He was establishing a principle, freedom, as the only real path to truth. The samurai against the system. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the role of the samurai was changing. The civil wars that had torn Japan apart were giving way to centralized power under the Tokugawa shogunate. Many warriors traded the battlefield for bureaucracy. The sword, once a symbol of life and death, became more ceremonial than real. Loyalty to a feudal lord became less spiritual and more political. Musashi watched this shift with suspicion. To him, a warrior who served out of convenience wasn't truly a warrior, just someone playing a role. Blind loyalty without awareness was a form of self-deception. And Musashi, who saw clarity as a core virtue, could not submit to a system built on illusion. Here, his outlook lines up with what later existentialist thinkers would say. Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, argued that man is condemned to be free and that following orders without thinking is bad faith, a way of running from the responsibility of existing. Musashi understood this instinctively. If you don't choose for yourself, you're not living for yourself. Refusal as an ethical stance. It's easy to mistake Musashi's attitude for arrogance, but his refusal to serve wasn't about looking down on others. It was a radical act of inner independence. He knew that accepting a master meant placing his own search under someone else's will, and for someone who saw the way as a path of absolute self-knowledge, that was unacceptable. Musashi believed truth couldn't be inherited, only discovered. In that sense, he stands close to Socrates, who rejected ready-made answers from external authorities. Socrates said, "Know thyself." Musashi lived, "Walk the way by yourself." Both understood that any truth forced from the outside isn't truth, it's doctrine. By renouncing lords and masters, Musashi put himself in a dangerous but deeply authentic place. He knew it meant loneliness, but he preferred that over living under the comfortable shelter of a lie. Freedom as discipline. Paradoxically, the warrior who freed himself from every master was the one who disciplined himself the most. Musashi never confused freedom with chaos. Quite the opposite. He was an ascetic of the sword, a monk of conflict. His rejection of structure wasn't abandonment, it was responsibility. He trained obsessively. He studied not only swordsmanship, but calligraphy, painting, sculpture, military strategy, and literature. He shaped himself, forging a philosophical and artistic identity out of the emptiness left by the absence of masters. Here we hear an echo of Immanuel Kant's idea. True freedom is following laws you give yourself. Musashi didn't reject authority, so he could live without rules. He rejected it, so he could build his own rules. Harsh, demanding rules. The freedom he wanted was to be loyal to his own way, and that required more than obedience. It required full awareness. the price of solitude. But that choice came with a cost. Musashi spent much of his life as a wanderer. No fixed home, no family, no early circle of disciples. For a long time, he lived on the margins. He faced the greatest warriors in Japan, yet slept under trees, ate when he could, and carried very little. And it's exactly there that the true lone warrior is born. Not as a romantic cliché, but as a hard reality. He learned to live with solitude, to turn silence into a temple and the road into a dojo. While others looked for schools, he looked for experience. While others read manuals, he read the world through direct practice. Musashi understood something most people avoid. Truth is rarely popular. The path of real freedom, of real autonomy, is narrow, rough, and almost always lonely. As Nietzsche wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Musashi faced every day the abyss of living without crutches, and he endured it, a critique of hierarchies and blind tradition. Feudal Japan worshipped tradition. Sword schools were treated almost like sacred temples. Students learned fixed styles, techniques passed down through generations. But Musashi saw danger in that, the freezing of truth. For him, following a school blindly was the same as abandoning real search. When a technique becomes untouchable, it stops being questioned and stops evolving. That's where his thinking breaks sharply from most samurai of his time. Musashi saw those schools as elegant cages. He preferred to be wrong on his own than right by tradition. That is exactly what made him innovative, unpredictable, and nearly unbeatable. This spirit connects with the pragmatism of William James, who valued direct experience over abstraction. Musashi didn't want to learn the way as theory. He wanted to live it with his body, his sword, his failures and victories. And that kind of learning is only possible outside the walls of convenience. The birth of the warrior philosopher Musashi's decision not to serve any master was the founding act of his philosophy. That's when he stopped being just a skilled swordsman and became a thinker of practice. By rejecting lords, he made room for thought. By rejecting fixed styles, he built a vision of the world. By choosing to be a ronin, he became free to shape his life as a work of art. Later, this philosophy would take written form in his famous Book of Five Rings, where he teaches not only about strategy, but about perception, timing, mind, and spirit. Musashi understood combat as a metaphor for life, and freedom as the sharpest blade of all. Musashi shows us that autonomy is an act of courage. You don't need to follow a master to follow a way, and truth, if it's real, has to be earned, not handed down. Those who only live by orders will never know the taste of discovery. Those who depend on the system will never find their true center, and those who never face the world alone will never truly know who they are. There was a time when Miyamoto Musashi could have settled down. After winning countless duels, after proving himself as a master swordsman, he could have chosen comfort, recognition, maybe even a title among the powerful men of his era. But he didn't. Instead, he chose the road, long, uncertain, often lonely. Not as an escape, but as practice. Because for Musashi, the road was more than a physical route. It was spiritual training ground. It was the dojo where not only the body, but the spirit would be shaped. This is a key point in his philosophy. The way is not learned standing still. It reveals itself in motion. Walking with intention. For years, Musashi wandered across Japan, challenging fighters from every school. He wasn't driven by a hunger for glory. He didn't duel for fame or for the pleasure of killing. What he was after was something harder to name: understanding. He saw each fight as a living question. How should I live? And the answer, even if incomplete, came with every traded blow, every breath between blades, every scar left by experience. Musashi treated every duel like a mirror. His opponent was, in a way, a projection of himself. The fear, the instinct, the hesitation, the clarity that surfaced in combat revealed more about his own soul than any theory or lecture ever could. He didn't see his enemies as obstacles, but as chances for inner revelation. This view echoes the thought of Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher who said, "You cannot step into the same river twice. Everything flows, everything changes." That's exactly what Musashi wanted to grasp: the constant movement of life and how to act rightly and effectively within it. The road as a place of transformation. In Zen Buddhism, from which Musashi absorbed many ideas, there's a central insight. Enlightenment doesn't come from the outside, but from direct, unfiltered experience of reality. It's not in words, it's in living. For Musashi, the road was the altar where that experience took place. What others would see as simple travel, he treated as training in awareness. The road taught what no school could: constant vigilance, humility before the unexpected, adaptation in chaos, and above all, total attention to the present moment. Musashi traveled light. He carried his swords, a few brushes, some scrolls, and almost no belongings. Every town, forest, and open field was a new lesson. He lived what the Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius would call training for the soul. In Meditations, Marcus wrote that the soul grows stronger when it adapts and withstands the blows of the outside world. That's exactly what Musashi did. He hardened his soul through direct contact with raw life. Duel as meditation. Today, we usually think of meditation as calm, silent, still. But for Musashi, combat itself was meditation, because it demanded absolute presence. In the middle of a duel, there was no room for distraction, no side thoughts, no hesitation. It was life in its most concentrated form. Every movement of the sword required full attention, almost sacred focus. Every step, every glance, every breath became part of a ritual. Musashi was there, fully, awake, aware. The duel wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It was how he met himself, how he burned away fear, anger, and doubt. Paradoxically, the battlefield became a place of clarity, because there was no space for lies. Just like Zen seeks Satori, the sudden moment of awakening, Musashi sought those flashes of complete clarity at the edge of the blade. He understood that real self-knowledge isn't theory, it's lived. As Martin Heidegger would later say, truth happens in the act of unveiling. In combat, everything was unveiled. Life as a path, not a finish line. Most people live waiting to arrive somewhere: a position, an achievement, a relationship. Musashi saw life differently. For him, there was no final arrival. There was only the way. The road was where a person is built, broken, and rebuilt, again and again. He had no obsession with being the best. That kind of comparison meant nothing to someone who saw himself as a permanent student. Even after winning dozens of duels, he kept walking, because he knew a true warrior doesn't aim to defeat others, but to defeat himself, repeatedly. This idea matches what Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching: "He who conquers others is strong, he who conquers himself is powerful." With his sword, Musashi wasn't only cutting down opponents, he was cutting through illusions. The wanderer who refused to take root along his journey, Musashi received many offers to settle. He could have become master of a great school, served powerful lords, or founded his own house. He turned it all down. He understood that to root himself too early was to risk trapping himself. Taking on disciples too soon could turn him into a transmitter of fixed dogmas instead of a seeker of living truths. The spirit, he believed, stays alive only when challenged, not when protected by comfort. Musashi didn't want fixed truths. He wanted to experience the world as something always fresh. To do that, he had to keep moving. He chose discomfort as a way to grow. As Seneca said, "A noble soul does not let itself be softened by comfort." Musashi lived that line. The path is lonely, but not empty. Musashi's wandering life might seem cold to those who long for belonging, But there is something deeply human in his choice. He reminds us that solitude, when embraced with purpose, is not abandonment. It is a return to oneself. On the road, he stepped away from the noise of others to hear his own voice, and that is exactly what many of us avoid. The silence needed to discover who we really are. Musashi shows that the way only appears when we're willing to walk without guarantees, without applause, without a pre-written map. As Kierkegaard taught, truth is subjectivity. Truth is lived from within. Musashi made the road his most intimate experience, where he saw himself, lost himself, and found himself again. Musashi didn't walk to arrive. He walked to become. Each step was a question, each duel, an answer, each silence on the road, a revelation. The road was his dojo because there were no masks there. The dust, the cold, the constant challenge, all of it was part of the training. He teaches us that the real way isn't in temples, schools, or titles. It's in the daily decision to step into risk, not to die, but to wake up. Perfect movements aren't enough. Real mastery begins when action stops being just technical and becomes an expression of something deeper inside. That understanding led Miyamoto Musashi to create his own style of combat, Niten Ichi Ryu, the school of two heavens as one. More than a new way to fight, it was a new way to see the world. Musashi understood that technique by itself is a cage disguised as skill. It can sharpen the body, but if it's not connected to the spirit, it turns into empty repetition. His goal wasn't just to find an efficient way to beat an opponent, but to shape a practice that expressed an inner truth. The style would be the outer form of something he had been building within for years. Complete integration between opposites, mind and body, reason and instinct, strategy and improvisation. Refusing to imitate before creating his own style, Musashi studied and observed many sword schools across Japan. They were traditional, respected, with long histories. Some focused on fast attack, others on patience. Some emphasized strength, others lightness. But in all of them, he felt something missing: life. He saw that many masters were more committed to preserving tradition than understanding its meaning. Students memorized stances, angles, and cuts, but moved like actors reciting an old script, not like warriors fully aware of the present moment. Musashi realized truth isn't passed on by imitation. As the Greek philosopher Plotinus said, the soul grows by what it creates, not by what it copies. That urge to create something authentic, personal, alive, pushed him to step away from existing schools and forge his own. The birth of Niten Ichi Ryu. Niten Ichi Ryu was born as an existential answer, not just a technical one. Its core principle is the use of two swords at once, a longsword, katana, and a short sword, wakizashi, together. This was revolutionary at the time. Traditionally, samurai used the longsword with both hands and kept the short one as a spare. Musashi flipped that logic, but that technical detail is just the surface. The real meaning is behind it. Fighting with two swords symbolized acting with totality, no holding back, no dividing body, mind, or spirit. Everything present in a single moment. Using both swords was a symbol of a larger philosophy, the union of opposites. It wasn't only about attacking and defending better. It was about joining what is usually split, rational and intuitive, calculated and spontaneous, body and awareness. So, Niten Ichi Ryu wasn't just another style. It was a direct reflection of Musashi's awakened mind, a mirror of his search for the way, or as he would later write, in the way of strategy, it is essential to see the whole. Technique as expression of spirit. When someone only repeats a technique, they're just obeying. But when someone creates a technique out of deep listening to themselves, they're expressing truth. Musashi understood that a movement is only real when it comes from the spirit. That's why his way of fighting wasn't rigid. It changed with the situation, the opponent, the terrain, the moment. He taught that strategy must be fluid and that a warrior should be like water, able to take any shape. That idea connects directly with Taoist wisdom, especially Lao Tzu's insight that water overcomes everything because it adapts to everything. Niten Ichi Ryu was less a catalogue of moves and more a state of mind, a way of being fully present in the world, ready for any attack without anxiety, moving without hesitation, but also without blind impulse. A union of speed and stillness, yin and yang, uniting what was split. Musashi looked at the world with a philosophical eye. He saw that life expresses itself in dualities, light and dark, hard and soft, masculine and feminine, reason and emotion. And he understood that real balance doesn't come from choosing one side, but from integrating both. His style was that idea in practice. Using two swords wasn't just about tactics. It was a symbol of reconciled duality. Just like yin and yang complete each other, Musashi wanted that totality in the act of combat. To fight with both hands was to say, I won't live as half of myself. I act with everything I am. It was an invitation to live fully, without splitting who we are between what we feel and what we think, what we want and what we do. Body and mind, the sword as a bridge. In his writings, Musashi repeats a key idea. The mind must command the body, but the body must teach the mind. That shows how deeply he understood the connection between action and awareness. For him, a warrior wasn't just someone who controlled the body, but someone who listened to it and learned from it. This resonates with philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who later said, "The body is our way of being in the world." Musashi had already discovered this through practice. The sword wasn't an external tool, but an extension of an awakened mind. Only when body and mind move as one does, the fight becomes true. Niten Ichi Ryu, then, wasn't only a way to fight. It was a way to perceive, a way of standing in the world with total presence, style as a way of life. Musashi never treated his school as an absolute truth. He didn't promote it as a final answer. He saw Niten Ichi Ryu as a path, something to live, question, refine. For him, the way never ends, and any technique that becomes rigid turns into a prison. In the Book of Five Rings, he writes, "The way of strategy is the way of nature, and nature is always in motion." From that, he leaves us a core lesson. Technique must grow out of real experience, and real experience should lead us beyond attachment to technique. Those who cling only to form lose the spirit. Those who live from the spirit go beyond the form. Every warrior is shaped by battle, but it's failure that makes him grow up. Miyamoto Musashi, known for his legendary victories in one-on-one duels, also faced the chaos of real war, and not as a glorified hero, but as a shadow among thousands. This was the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, one of the greatest clashes in Japan's feudal history. There, Musashi didn't shine. He wasn't a standout. His name didn't echo in the reports. But he survived, and it was that quiet survival that gave him a decisive lesson. The one who wins isn't always the most talented. It's the one who reads the chaos best. The field where glory drowned in blood, Sekigahara, was more than just a battle. It was a turning point. It put two great forces face to face, the Eastern Army, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the Western Army, led by Ishida Mitsunari. In just a few hours, more than 160,000 men clashed in a brutal dance of strategy, betrayal, and slaughter. That day decided the political future of Japan, ending the Sengoku era and opening the Tokugawa shogunate, which would last for over 250 years. Musashi was there, still young, probably around 16 or 17. He fought with the Western forces, the losing side. He didn't command troops, he wasn't a key figure. He was just another sword among thousands, swallowed by confusion, dust, and blood on a chaotic battlefield. But even if he didn't leave visible marks on history that day, Sekigahara left invisible marks on his soul. And that's where the real lesson lives. The bitter awakening. Talent isn't enough. Up to that point, Musashi had stood out in duels. He was a prodigy. He had already beaten grown men, defeated famous styles, and proven his technical superiority several times. But at Sekigahara, none of that mattered. There was no ceremonial honor, no fair fight, no control. It was pure chaos. Arrows, spears, cavalry, smoke, screams, mixed orders, messy terrain. Many of the most skilled warriors died without even seeing their enemy. Others survived simply because they happened to be in the right place at the right time. At Sekigahara, Musashi learned that technique alone, no matter how good, is useless in the real world if it doesn't come with awareness, adaptability, and a bit of luck. That realization is crucial. It marks the end of the quiet arrogance that talent can create. Musashi understood that a true warrior isn't just someone who controls the sword, but someone who reads the whole situation, even when everything is on fire. The humility of the defeated most people would have left that battle full of anger, frustration, or wounded pride. Musashi walked away with something rarer: humility. He realized that his personal victories in duels hadn't fully prepared him for the unpredictability of large-scale war. His individual strength, no matter how sharp, was just a drop in the ocean of real combat. And here Musashi gives us a priceless lesson. Humility doesn't come just from losing, but from understanding what the loss shows you. He didn't play the victim. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to erase Sekigahara from his story. Instead, he kept it as a core part of his path. This attitude echoes Stoic wisdom. Seneca wrote, "No wind is favorable to the one who doesn't know where he's going." On that battlefield, Musashi saw that knowing how to swing a sword wasn't enough if he couldn't read the wind of war. He learned the hardest truth: the best doesn't always win. Sometimes the most aware does. Reading chaos, strategy beyond technique. Sekigahara showed in practice that life doesn't follow fair rules. In a duel, there's balance: two warriors, two bodies, two minds. But in real war, the battlefield is a living beast. Everything can change in seconds. Allies betray, orders fail, weather shifts, the ground misleads. It's the kingdom of uncertainty. From that experience, Musashi began to shape a broader vision of combat, not just as body technique, but as strategic reading of reality. He realized the fight doesn't start when the sword is drawn, but much earlier, in understanding the situation, sensing invisible patterns, and controlling emotions when nothing goes as planned. It's the same idea that later appears in the work of Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian military thinker, who said, "War is the continuation of politics by other means." For Clausewitz, war is naturally chaotic and demands constant flexibility. Musashi had already lived that truth. To win is, above all, to adapt. Luck as part of reality. Musashi never romanticized luck, but he never denied it either. At Sekigahara, he saw highly prepared warriors die from random blows, while ordinary soldiers survived by chance. That experience taught him that chance is part of life, and wisdom means learning how to live with it. As Seneca said, "Luck favors the prepared mind." Musashi absorbed that idea. He understood he could never control every factor, but he could train himself to endure the unexpected without falling apart. Sekigahara showed him that rigidity is fatal, and survival depends more on moving with the world than trying to force it. Flexibility as true strength. Real war taught Musashi that flexibility isn't weakness, it's intelligence. The rigid warrior breaks, the flexible one survives. This became a central pillar of his philosophy, later expressed in the Book of Five Rings, especially in the water chapter, where he writes that water adapts to any container and that a warrior must be like water. He began to see strategy not as a fixed plan, but as a state of constant attention, ready to change as reality changes. For him, the way wasn't a straight road, but a river that twists with the land. Flexibility, then, isn't giving up. It's surviving with wisdom. Failure as revelation. Most warriors would have ignored Sekigahara or tried to forget it. Musashi did the opposite. He turned failure into a lens. He didn't see defeat as a stain, but as a mirror. And that's one of the greatest lessons his life offers us. Failure is inevitable. Learning from it is a choice. Musashi chose to learn. He left that war not as a celebrated hero, but as an awakened observer. He stepped away from large-scale battles, but not from the fight. He followed his own path, and now, more than ever, he understood that his real war was internal, against illusion, against pride, against rigidity. Musashi survived the greatest war of his time, not as a legend on the field, but as someone who paid attention. Sekigahara was his harshest teacher, because it showed him, without mercy, that real life doesn't care about theories. Victory is not always fair, and the true warrior is the one who learns even from defeat. The battle was bloody, the failure silent, but the lesson echoed through his whole life. The victory that teaches the most is the one that never came. Miyamoto Musashi wasn't just an unbeatable swordsman, he was a breaker of molds. When he challenged and defeated not just one, but 3 members of the Yoshioka school, one of the most prestigious in feudal Japan, his goal wasn't just to win fights. He was proving a point, delivering a live critique, turning the sword into a philosophical argument. Musashi wasn't fighting people, he was fighting rigid ideas, dead styles, traditions that had stopped evolving. The Yoshioka school symbolized all of that: prestige, polished technique, hierarchy, dogma. By completely defeating it, Musashi wasn't celebrating destruction. He was celebrating the freeing of form. He believed the way is only true when it's alive, and anything alive needs to change. The Yoshioka school, symbol of frozen tradition, founded in Kyoto, the Yoshioka school was one of the most respected kenjutsu schools of the Sengoku period. It had ties to the imperial court and trained highly regarded warriors who served in powerful positions. The name Yoshioka carried weight, and facing its masters was, for many, an honor that bordered on suicide. But for Musashi, blind respect was the first step toward philosophical blindness. In his own journey, he'd already realized that fixed styles turn into crutches, that unquestioned rules stop being tools and become prisons. Like many traditional schools, Yoshioka had fallen into that trap, preserving technique for technique's sake, even after the soul of the practice was gone. The first duel, Yoshioka Seijuro. The first fight was against Yoshioka Seijuro, the headmaster of the school. The duel took place in Kyoto, and Musashi arrived late on purpose, a psychological move that already showed his philosophy of breaking the opponent's balance before the first strike. Seijuro was technical and disciplined, but conditioned by the predictability of his style. Musashi, on the other hand, was pure movement, fluid, adaptable, unpredictable. The fight ended quickly. Musashi landed a brutal blow that destroyed Seijuro's right arm. A clear victory, but more than physical, it was symbolic. The core pillar of the school had been shaken. But Yoshioka wasn't ready to accept defeat. Wounded pride demanded revenge. So came the second duel. The second duel, Yoshioka Denshichiro. Seijuro's younger brother, Yoshioka Denshichiro, took on the duty of restoring the school's honor. The new duel also happened in Kyoto, in front of witnesses. This time, Musashi arrived on time and finished it even more decisively. Denshichiro was killed with a single strike. Now the school was on the edge of collapse. As a last gamble, they arranged a third confrontation. Musashi versus Seijuro's young son, Yoshioka Matashichiro, only 12 years old. But this time, it was a trap. Dozens of armed warriors would be there to ambush Musashi under the guise of a fair duel. Musashi arrived early. He saw through the setup. With almost unreal precision, he attacked before the net closed. Matashichiro was killed, and many members of the school were cut down. That day marked the end of Yoshioka as a serious martial force, destruction as a philosophical act. This chain of duels wasn't just a string of wins. Musashi understood exactly what he was doing. He knew that by crushing Yoshioka, he wasn't just defeating fighters, He was attacking the very idea of tradition as unquestionable authority. Musashi believed that doctrines repeated without reflection kill the spirit. When a style is followed like a religion, it becomes dogma, and dogma suffocates truth. Yoshioka, in that sense, was a glorious shell that had already gone hollow inside. Musashi was the blade that split it open to expose the emptiness. This attitude lines up with ideas that Friedrich Nietzsche would later express when criticizing herd morality and blind obedience to tradition. Nietzsche said, "Man must become who he is. To do that, he has to break what chains him." Musashi was already doing that in practice, cutting what was rigid so something alive could emerge. Life as a living practice, not dead repetition. Musashi had no problem with knowledge from the past. He had a problem with worshipping it. He didn't reject old techniques. He rejected repeating them without awareness. For him, every generation should rediscover truth through direct experience, not just mimic inherited movements as if they were sacred. He knew the way is like a river. If you try to lock it in place, it rots. If you let it flow, even as it changes its course, it stays alive. The way cannot be copied. It has to be lived. This connects with Zen's idea of Shoshin, beginner's mind. The true practitioner keeps a mind that's open, curious, humble, willing to learn and unlearn. Even as a master, Musashi behaved like a student. That's one reason he was so hard to defeat. He never stopped questioning. Spirit over form. By destroying Yoshioka, Musashi reinforced a principle he'd been living for years. Form is never more important than spirit. Fighters who lock themselves into patterns become predictable. And predictable, in combat and in life, means vulnerable. His own style, Niten Ichi Ryu, wasn't rigid. There were no sacred sequences, no untouchable moves. Every fight demanded a fresh response. Every situation was unique. True strategy for him was something born from the moment, not from memory. As he would later write in the Book of Five Rings, you must understand that there is no fixed style in the way of strategy. It must change according to the situation. That idea connects directly with existentialist thought in Sartre. The human being is always in the making. Any system that tries to define once and for all what is right, what is wrong, or what must be followed, kills the freedom at the core of life. The courage to be the break. It's always easier to follow what already exists, safer to repeat what's accepted. Musashi knew that and chose to be the break anyway, because he understood that tradition without renewal becomes idolatry, and idolatry suffocates truth. So he acted, he cut, he disrupted, he provoked. His duels were less about showing dominance and more about waking people up, to make them see they were trapped, that they were only repeating, that they had abandoned the real search. He didn't want to destroy people. He wanted to break mental cages, because he knew real practice only begins after your certainties fall apart. Musashi destroyed the Yoshioka school, but his act went beyond the sword. He broke rigidity to remind us that the way cannot be inherited. It can only be lived. To live the way is to reinvent yourself at every step. To cut, not to harm, but to free. To fight, not for glory, but for truth. When tradition turns into a prison, the first strike must be against it. Some battles aren't won when the sword hits the enemy. They're won much earlier, when one mind finds the other's blind spot. When the warrior, still silent, has already won because he knows exactly where the opponent will stumble. Miyamoto Musashi understood this perfectly, and in his legendary duel against Sasaki Kojiro, he showed the world that strategy, timing, and attitude are stronger than even the most refined technique. This wasn't just a duel between two exceptional swordsmen. It was a clash between two ways of living. On one side, the shine of form. On the other, the depth of emptiness. On one side, pride in technique. On the other, the detachment of a strategist. What happened on that beach at Ganryujima wasn't just a fight. It was brutal proof that real combat begins in the mind. Sasaki Kojiro, the master of the longsword. Sasaki Kojiro was one of the most respected swordsmen in Japan at the time. He was famous for his own signature move, the Tsubamegaeshi, swallow cut, and for wielding an extra-long sword called Monohoshi Zao, which demanded strength, precision, and elegance. Kojiro's style impressed everyone with its beauty and speed. He was feared and admired, known for his confidence and flawless presence. But that confidence, often mistaken for absolute security, hid a weak point: the predictability of his ego. Kojiro was perfect inside his style, and for Musashi, that meant he was trapped. When movement becomes predictable, no matter how effective, it can be beaten by someone who fights outside the pattern. And Musashi never fought the way people expected. Strategy before the first strike. The duel was set for Ganrujima, a remote island surrounded by open sea. Kojiro arrived early, dressed for battle, imposing, watched by everyone. He was the center of attention, the star of the moment. Musashi, on purpose, arrived late. Many saw this as disrespect, but it was a calculated psychological move. Waiting creates tension. Tension creates imbalance. As time passed, Kojiro's mind filled with expectation, irritation, and probably anger, and more. Musashi rode to the island himself, and with him he brought a wooden oar carved into the shape of a sword. He didn't bring his famous katana. He chose to fight with an improvised wooden weapon he had just shaped, as if saying, "My mind is my real blade," the mind that wins before the body. When Musashi stepped off the boat holding that piece of wood, he had already won half the fight. Kojiro, thrown off, saw all the rules broken at once: the formality, the honor, the image of a proper duel. But Musashi knew, the one who controls reality is the one who isn't chained to rituals. The duel began, and in a matter of moments, Musashi landed a single, precise strike. He hit Kojiro in the head with enough force to kill him. It was over almost instantly. No show, no sequence of dramatic clashes, only clarity, timing, and total control of the situation. Timing, rhythm, and presence. Musashi saw timing as essential to combat. Not clock time, but ma'ai, the right distance, rhythm, and moment between fighters. Knowing when to move, where to move, and how to act. He wasn't obsessed with acting fast. He wanted to act at the exact moment when action could not fail. By arriving late, he didn't just throw Kojiro off balance. He aligned himself with the perfect psychological moment. He waited until Kojiro was at his most vulnerable, tense, emotional, offended, distracted. Musashi wasn't fighting Kojiro's body, he was fighting his mind, and he already understood it better than Kojiro did. This sense of timing echoes Sun Tzu's idea in The Art of War. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Musashi didn't avoid the physical clash, but he had already won before it truly began. Form versus spirit. Kojiro was a master of form, well-trained, precise, elegant, but he relied too much on his technique. That made him predictable. And for Musashi, that was fatal. A true warrior, in his view, doesn't move by habit, but by perception. Technique only matters when it grows out of full awareness, not from memorized repetition. Musashi was the opposite, the embodiment of a free spirit in combat. He wasn't tied to tradition, aesthetics, or ceremony. He fought with whatever he had, at the right moment, fully present. And that shows us something essential. Raw strength doesn't decide the fight. An awakened mind does. As Bruce Lee would say centuries later, deeply influenced by this same spirit. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. Musashi was water, Kojiro was stone, and water always wins, even when it looks gentle. The humility of fighting with wood. Many saw the oar as mockery or insult, but there was deep meaning in it. Musashi didn't need a legendary sword to win. His true weapon was his mind, his perception, his inner freedom. By using a piece of wood against a master with a deadly blade, he was saying, it's not the weapon that decides, it's the one who wields it. But that gesture is also a lesson in detachment. Musashi wasn't attached to symbols or appearances. He fought with what reality gave him and made it enough. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. Musashi always responded with clarity, even in chaos. That's why he was unbeatable. The victory that revealed the true way. The duel with Kojiro was likely Musashi's last great duel of his youth, not because there were no more challengers, but because after that, there was nothing left to prove. There, he showed that the real battle is not against the other. It's against illusion, against vanity, predictability, ego. Musashi won because he refused to play Kojiro's game. He made his own rules, shaped the situation to his advantage, and proved that a free, strategic, fully aware mind is worth more than any famous style. Musashi won before he fought, because he wasn't chasing victory, he was chasing understanding. And by understanding time, the opponent, and himself, he turned combat into wisdom, and victory into silence. The sword does not win. The one who no longer depends on it does. There comes a moment for those who seek truth when the noise of the world stops teaching. When outside voices become echoes, and the only conversation that matters is the silent one you have with your own soul. After dozens of duels, years on the road, countless victories, and invitations from powerful lords, Miyamoto Musashi didn't choose the palace. He chose the cave. There, at Reigando, a cave tucked in the mountains of Kumamoto, Musashi withdrew from the world to live out his final years, not as a bitter hermit, but as someone who understood that silence is the last teacher. There was no luxury, no disciples, no mirrors, only rock, wind, and awareness. There, the warrior became a philosopher, and solitude stopped being absence. It became method. Refusing honors. After earning national fame, defeating the legendary Sasaki Kojiro, and wiping out entire schools like Yoshioka, Musashi was courted by various clans and daimyo. He could have lived among nobles, taught at prestigious schools, and accepted riches and titles. He turned it all down, not out of disdain, but out of clarity. He knew glory seduces, and seduction paralyzes. For anyone who wants to grasp the essence of life, comfort is a trap. Musashi chose stone floors over a cushioned throne. He chose the cave over the court. As he wrote in his Dokudo shortly before he died, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not desire high positions. Do not live for other people's approval." That choice offers a timeless question. How many of us keep chasing recognition and forget inner clarity? Musashi knew truth doesn't shout in crowds. It whispers in silence. The cave as a temple. Reigando wasn't just a physical refuge. It was a symbolic space. By entering it, Musashi left behind the persona of the unbeatable warrior, the legendary duelist. There, he was simply a man facing himself. No swords, no opponents, no audience. In the Buddhist tradition, especially Zen, silence is practice. The monk grows quiet to see. The warrior grows quiet to understand. That's exactly what Musashi sought. To see with the mind's eye, to hear with the ear of the spirit. In the cave solitude, he wrote, meditated, and watched nature. His final teachings came not from the sword in motion, but from the sword at rest. Action turned into contemplation, and contemplation into wisdom. Silence as a philosophical method. Many people think wisdom comes from speaking, but great thinkers knew the essential is revealed in silence. Socrates pursued dialogue, yet real learning for him happened in the space between words. Lao Tzu wrote, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." Musashi reached the same place, not through theory, but through experience. For years, he heard the noise of battle. He watched ego swell, pride grow, vanity distort reality. Over time, he understood that only in deep silence can you hear what is true. And the cave's silence wasn't emptiness, it was presence. Everything spoke there. The wind, the drip of water on stone, the rhythm of breath. Each thing was a teacher. Musashi kept quiet, not from exhaustion, but from maturity. Solitude is the spirit's alchemy. Most people avoid solitude for fear of what they might find inside themselves. Musashi went the other way. He embraced the void as part of refining the spirit. In solitude, he did not get lost. He found himself. In the absence of outside stimulation, he heard his inner noise and transformed it. Musashi's philosophy isn't only forged in crossing blades. Above all, it's forged in the courage to be with yourself, without distractions or decoration. The cave, in that sense, was a perfect mirror. What it reflected was naked awareness, without titles, victories, or past. This idea connects with the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, imagining loss, accepting it, and living simply. Seneca said, "It's when we're alone that we most confront who we really are." Musashi knew this. He didn't run from himself. He faced himself to the end. From action to contemplation, the final shift. For most of his life, Musashi lived the way through action. Every duel, every mile on the road, every loss and victory were practical expressions of a philosophy still taking shape inside him. But in the cave, the way took another form. It became writing, art, silence. There he wrote his deepest work, Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings. There, he turned everything he had lived into symbols, reflections, strategies. Each element, earth, water, fire, wind, void, became a dimension of existence, combat, and consciousness. Action gave way to synthesis. The sword gave way to the brush, and the warrior became a sage. The freedom only solitude gives, Musashi realized the greatest freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's not needing anything. In the cave, he had nothing left to prove. No need to please, teach, justify, or protect a reputation. He was free because he was whole. That freedom is rare because it demands total surrender. It asks you to let go of the self the world applauds, to rediscover the self that silence reveals. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are," and no one becomes who they are while surrounded by other people's voices. Musashi turned solitude into an inner excavation. There, without noise, he found what no duel could give, the calm clarity of being at peace with what is. Death as contemplation, not tragedy. At Reigando, Musashi prepared to die, not in fear or despair, but as part of his practice. Each breath was a lucid farewell, each written line an offering to impermanence. His final text, the Dokodo, the way to be followed alone, is the culmination of it all. 21 precepts that ask for no faith and no ritual, only clarity, non-attachment, presence. There he writes, "Accept death with serenity. Do not desire, do not fear, do not depend." It's the testament of someone who didn't flee solitude, but turned it into wisdom. Musashi didn't withdraw out of weakness. He withdrew because he understood that at some point the way requires silence, not as absence, but as maturity. The cave wasn't an end. It was the true beginning. There, the warrior set down his blades and plunged into the essence he had always sought, the clear stillness of one who lived fully and now rests in what he has understood. When everything grows quiet, the spirit can finally hear. Few people understand art as a battlefield, but Miyamoto Musashi saw the brush, the chisel, and the written word with the same intensity as the sword. For him, there was no separation between warrior and artist. Both were walking the same path, just using different tools. Art for Musashi wasn't an escape or decoration. It was spiritual practice, a conscious act. His painting, calligraphy, and sculpture all carried the same spirit behind his strikes: direction, precision, nothing extra. He didn't decorate, he revealed. And in doing that, he taught something rare. Beauty isn't in what you add, but in what remains after everything unnecessary is removed. The way is the way, whether with a brush or a blade. That idea, attributed to Musashi, sums up his view of art and life. The tool doesn't matter. What matters is the presence you bring to the act. An artist forged in combat, Musashi was, above all, a man of totality. His path as an artist wasn't separate from his life as a fighter. It grew out of it. Throughout his life, while dueling and sharpening his martial skill, he also studied painting, calligraphy, poetry, wood and metal carving, and writing. This wasn't a hobby, it was discipline. He knew each form of expression strengthened the others. The precision of the brush refined the precision of the sword. Steady lines trained control over impulse. The emptiness of the paper reflected the inner emptiness of an alert warrior. Art was another arena where the mind was tested, the ego was shaved down, and clarity took shape. The aesthetics of essence, less is more. Musashi's art doesn't chase ornament. His paintings are made of few strokes, done with firm, steady, decisive movements. No excess color, no overworked details, just presence, just decision. He painted birds, monks, warriors, landscapes, always in a direct, simple way, as if each line held the spirit of the moment. This connects directly with Zen practice, where calligraphy and painting are not just art, but meditation in motion. Just like in his duels, Musashi didn't paint to impress. He painted to understand. Each stroke was a breath, each figure a reflection of his inner state. This way of seeing lines up with the thoughts of Japanese writer Junichiro Tanizaki in Praise of Shadows, where traditional Japanese aesthetics value the subtle, the imperfect, the incomplete. Musashi embodied that. His art was the opposite of spectacle. It was visual silence, the way of the brush, presence and letting go. In Zen painting, you don't erase or fix. Each stroke is final. That demands full attention. No hesitation. The brush doesn't forgive. Just like the sword. This reflects Musashi's view of action. Act fully, without doubt, without distraction. In combat or in art, the gesture must be whole. And a whole gesture can only come from an empty spirit, free from vanity, from craving approval, from fear. He saw art as a way to polish the self. It wasn't something for rest days. It was part of his training. Just as he trained the body with the sword, he trained the spirit with the brush. Art should be born from the need to express the way, not from the desire to be praised. With that, he stands against the idea of creating just to please or sell. For him, the value of a work was in its truth, not in its applause. Sculpture, form and emptiness, Musashi also sculpted. He carved small Buddhas, masks, ritual objects. Sculpting is the act of removing, revealing the form that's already inside the material. That practice is tied to a bigger idea. Essence is already there. You just take away what doesn't belong. It echoes a line attributed to Michelangelo. The sculpture is already inside the marble. I just remove the excess. Musashi did the same with wood, metal, his thinking, and himself, cutting away until only what mattered was left. The sword cuts, the chisel cuts, thought must cut too. Writing is distilled experience. The high point of this union between art and combat was his writing, especially his masterpiece, The Book of Five Rings, Go-Rin no Sho. Far from being just a manual on fighting, it's a practical philosophy of perception, strategy, and life. He uses the five elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and void, as metaphors for the mind and for action. Each one represents a side of the path. His writing is like his sword, direct, sharp, without fluff, no wasted words, no empty theory. He doesn't write to sound clever. He writes to pass on a living practice. Even the structure of the book reflects his aesthetic. Clear, lean, objective. Like in his paintings, the empty space, what is left unsaid, is part of the message. This precision calls to mind the stoic tone of Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. Short, clear reflections loaded with depth. Both write not to impress others, but to remind themselves of what really matters. Art as path, not product. Musashi never split his life into this is art, and this is fighting, and this is spirituality. For him, the way is one. If you train the sword with presence, paint with presence, write with presence, it's all the same way expressing itself in different forms. That's very close to Zen, where any activity, chopping wood, drinking tea, sweeping the floor, can be a path to awakening if done with full attention. Musashi understood this through experience, not doctrine. His whole life was integration. There wasn't Musashi the warrior on one side and Musashi the artist on the other. There was one man, whole, the transcendence of the gesture. In his final years, in the cave at Reigando, Musashi dedicated himself almost entirely to art and writing, not because he abandoned the warrior, but because the warrior had become silence. His sword had become the brush, his battles internal, his practice refined. This shows that life is one path that keeps changing shape, but never splits. Art was the final stage of his training, the point where the gesture becomes pure expression of being. Musashi showed that to live is to act with presence, and that any act done with true attention is art. He cut with the sword the same way he painted with the brush, without hesitation, without excess, with a clear and awake spirit. His art didn't try to please. It tried to reveal, and with just a few lines, it revealed what many can't see even with 1,000 words. On the way, everything is training, even silence. Near the end of his life, Miyamoto Musashi no longer held his sword in constant battle, but his spirit was sharper than ever. After decades walking across Japan, fighting deadly duels, rejecting masters, destroying schools, and diving into deep solitude, he turned to one final act: writing. Not to teach how to cut, but to teach how to live. That's how Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of 5 Rings, was born. Far from just a manual on martial technique, the book is philosophy in action. Written by a man who had faced death up close more times than he could count, the Book of 5 Rings is a testament carved out of real experience, sweat, pain, strategy, and silence. Every line was forged with the same intensity with which Musashi once swung his blade. It's not an academic treatise, it's philosophy carved in blood. The writing context. The cave as sanctuary. The Book of 5 Rings was written around 1645, when Musashi was close to 60 and living in seclusion in the Reigando cave in Kumamoto. His body was tired. The duels were over, but his mind had never been clearer. There, in silence, watching nature, writing in daylight, reflecting on everything he had lived, Musashi turned his life into thought. His sword had become a brush. His strategy had become philosophy. Unlike fencing manuals or samurai codes of conduct, the Book of 5 Rings doesn't lay down rigid rules. It offers paths. It's a journey through 5 books, each one linked to an element of nature: earth, water, fire, wind, and void. And each element is a metaphor for life, combat, and awareness. Musashi writes the way he fought: no fluff, no fear, no compromise. The Book of Earth. The foundation. Earth is the base. In this section, Musashi talks about stance, structure, spirit, and daily practice. But his message goes beyond technique. It's about attitude toward life. Just as the earth supports everything, a warrior needs solid grounding. That means discipline, constant training, and above all, a steady spirit. Earth is commitment to the path. Talent alone is nothing. You have to dig, repeat, go deeper. In the way of strategy, you must train every day. Musashi. This lines up with Stoic thought. Excellence isn't an accident, it's a habit. Seneca wrote that character is built through deliberate repetition. Musashi lived that with the sword, and wrote so the reader would understand. Inner stability comes before any outer victory. The Book of Water, adapting to the shape. Water is fluidity. Here, Musashi teaches that a true warrior cannot be rigid. He must adapt to each situation the way water adapts to any container. He starts to show his core idea of constant adaptation. The fight changes, the world changes, the opponent changes. Those who don't change die. Water adjusts to all things. In your strategy, you must be like water, fluid, but without losing your form. This connects directly to Lao Tzu's Taoism, where water is the symbol of supreme wisdom, humble, flexible, patient, yet unstoppable. Musashi lived this principle. Facing countless different styles, he didn't win by forcing his own shape on others. He won by reading, absorbing, and redirecting theirs. The lesson is clear. Rigidity leads to ruin. The path is conscious flexibility. The Book of Fire, intensity with clarity. Fire is direct clash, real combat, where strategy becomes action. In this book, Musashi talks about rhythm, timing, reading the opponent, and attacking. But again, it's not about blind aggression. It's about precise, clear action. Fire moves quickly, but only burns truly when it has direction. For Musashi, battle was a moment of sharpened awareness. His fire is not rage, it's lucid force. Anger is poison because it blinds. Effective action comes from balancing emotion and reason. That balance echoes the Stoic ideal of inner calm, ataraxia, that lets someone act without being dragged by impulse. Musashi understood. Emotion can push you, but the mind must steer. Fire teaches, act with energy, but with judgment. The Book of Wind, knowing others, knowing yourself. In the Book of Wind, Musashi analyzes other schools, but once again, he's doing more than technical critique. He's pointing to something deeper. By studying others, you see yourself more clearly. Wind here represents outside ideas, inherited traditions, different styles. Musashi doesn't write to insult them, but to warn. Following any doctrine blindly is betraying your own spirit. Know other styles, but do not imitate them. This touches a core philosophical point: authenticity. Nietzsche would later write, "Become who you are." Musashi was already living that. Studying is essential. Copying is losing yourself. The real path can only be walked by someone who listens to their own nature, even if that means breaking with everything they were taught. The Book of Void, the essence beyond form. Finally comes Void, the shortest and deepest book. Here, Musashi speaks of the state where the warrior goes beyond technique, beyond thought, beyond ego. It's where action flows without effort, where the mind merges with the moment, where awareness meets reality directly. Void is where there is no form. When you understand the void, you understand the way. This void is close to the Zen idea of mushin, no mind, pure presence, free from judgment, where action comes from clarity, not calculation. It's not emptiness as lack, it's fullness without noise. Here Musashi shows the peak of his journey, the point where the sword is no longer necessary because the spirit is aligned with the flow of reality. This also resonates with Heidegger's sense of an authentic being, someone who lives without masks or distractions, in direct contact with being itself. A legacy beyond the sword. The Book of Five Rings is not a book about war. It's a manual of clarity. It's an invitation for each person to discover their own strategy, their own rhythm, their own way. Musashi doesn't tell us what to think. He shows how to perceive, with the body, with time, with the spirit. Written by hand shortly before his death, the book is his final duel, not against another warrior, but against forgetting, confusion, and superficiality. Musashi didn't write to teach people how to win. He wrote to teach them how to understand. Each element is a doorway, each lesson a mirror, each line a cut-through illusion. The way is to practice, to know, to forget, and then to act without thinking. Every structure starts with a foundation. Every tree stands because of its roots. Every warrior touches the ground before raising the sword. For Miyamoto Musashi, earth was the first and most important of the elements. In his Book of Five Rings, the Book of Earth comes before all the others, not by accident. It is the base of the path. Musashi understood that without a solid foundation, everything collapses. Without inner stability, technique fails, strategy shakes, and the spirit gets lost. Earth isn't just the ground under your feet, it's the ground your soul stands on. In the way of strategy, you must be as firm as the earth. Book of Five Rings. Here, he invites us to see that real wisdom doesn't come from sudden inspiration, but from repetition. Mastery isn't a gift, it's excavation. And to become unshakable in the middle of chaos, you first need to be loyal to what no one sees, your base. The value of the ordinary Musashi didn't romanticize talent. He had no patience for people proud of learning fast or winning easily. For him, real value lives in steady, quiet, almost invisible practice. That's what he did, day after day. Train, observe, reflect, repeat. When no one was watching, when no one was praising, when victory was still uncertain. Earth represents that commitment to the ordinary, to what's done in silence, to the small actions that, over time, shape the spirit. Steadiness isn't a feeling, it's a habit, not a sudden spark, a daily choice. This is close to Aristotle's idea. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Musashi wasn't extraordinary because he was born gifted. He was extraordinary because he planted the seeds of steadiness every single day. Practice as digging into the spirit. For many people, training is just repeating moves. For Musashi, it was a process of digging into himself. With each session, he removed a bit of doubt, a stone of pride, a root of fear. He didn't train only to fight, he trained to know himself. Practice was the mirror. The sword was the tool. Every missed strike revealed distraction. Every weak block showed a wandering mind. Every mistake was a lesson carved into the body. Training for Musashi was digging down through everything false until he found the solid rock where truth could stand. It's a powerful lesson in a world obsessed with quick results. Musashi reminds us, the essential isn't conquered. It's uncovered through persistence. Steadiness is not stiffness. Important point. Earth, for Musashi, did not mean being hard-headed. Steady doesn't mean stubborn. It's consistency with awareness. Stability that allows movement, not weight that stops it. Just like good soil isn't rock hard but still strong enough to hold life, someone on the path should be strong without being rigid. He should withstand impact without snapping. Hold his principles without rejecting new learning. Musashi knew many warriors fell because they confused steadiness with ego. They thought never changing position was a virtue, when often it was just fear in disguise. True steadiness is in the one who can change without losing himself, like ground that shifts with the earthquake, but is still earth. Earth as body. Where it all begins, Musashi also saw the body as an expression of earth. The path starts there. Before mastering the mind, you must know your body, control your movements, align your posture. Without that base, any strategy is fantasy. He said a warrior should have firm footing, upright posture, and a low center of gravity, not just in combat, but in life. That reflected a deep belief. Physical balance is a mirror of inner balance. This connects with Zen teaching, where meditation posture is as important as the state of mind. Body and mind are one, the Zen masters say. Musashi lived this in every step, every drill, every silence. Earth wasn't just a symbol. It was the ground beneath his feet and the ground inside his chest. Earth as humility, being where you are, There's also a moral side to this symbol. Earth teaches humility. It's under everything, holding everyone up, without demanding credit. It doesn't shine, but without it, nothing stands. Musashi learned this in practice. Even after legendary victories, he kept training like a beginner. Even while feared by great masters, he chose the quiet road over the spotlight. He knew a true warrior doesn't rise through pride. He roots himself through awareness. Do not desire high positions. Dakodo. That's the wisdom of Earth. Stay where you're needed. Be foundation. Support. Don't show off. It's a direct challenge to today's mindset of seeking visibility without maturity, status without structure. Musashi answers with example. Real greatness is built on solid ground. Earth as persistence, the strength to stay in battle. Earth keeps you from collapsing. It holds your weight under pressure. But above all, it lets you get back up. Musashi faced failure, doubt, and loss, but he always returned to training. Returned to the basics. Returned to the foundation. Earth kept him standing even when everything else shook. This constant return to practice, even after setbacks, is one of the strongest proofs of his philosophy. The path is not a straight line, it's a circle. And each time around, you dig deeper. That's close to stoic resilience. As Epictetus taught, you cannot control what happens, only how you respond. And for Musashi, the response always started in the same place, the base, the practice, the earth. Musashi reminds us that the extraordinary is born from the ordinary done with devotion, that the sword doesn't win by force, it wins by clarity, and clarity only appears to those with steady footing. Earth is where the warrior plants his attention, where the student roots his presence, where the spirit grows roots, so it isn't blown away by the winds of illusion. Without a base, there is no strategy. Without ground, there is no path. The world may shake, the enemy may surprise, but the one who has cultivated the firmness of earth does not fall. He bends, learns, and rises again. Rigidity is the first kind of death. Everything that doesn't adapt breaks. Everything that resists the flow of the world is eventually destroyed by it. Miyamoto Musashi knew this, not because he read it somewhere, but because he saw it. He saw unbeatable masters fall because they trusted their forms too much. He saw fast, strong warriors die because they couldn't change. He saw glorious styles collapse because they refused to evolve. That's why, in the Book of Five Rings, the second element is water. After earth, which represents stability and foundation, water stands for movement, flexibility, and adaptation. Through it, Musashi teaches one of the most important lessons of the path. Rigidity is death, adaptation is life. Water. Shape without shape. Water has no shape of its own. It takes the shape of whatever holds it. It runs through valleys, slips into cracks, moves around rocks, goes where it can flow. But even as it changes form, it never loses its nature. That is the spirit of the warrior Musashi cultivated. Not the one who repeats the same moves forever, but the one who watches, feels, and responds to the moment. The true warrior is not predictable. He doesn't cling to fixed techniques. He moves like water, impossible to pin down, but impossible to stop. This connects directly with Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and rigid. Musashi didn't quote Lao Tzu. He lived it. He understood that water's strength is in not resisting, in flowing, the death of the rigid. Throughout his life, Musashi faced many schools and styles. A lot of them were built on fixed structures, set stances, preset sequences, codified strikes. No matter how well trained they were, most of those fighters became predictable. And in real combat, predictability is weakness. It's like a frozen river, nice to look at, easy to shatter. Musashi said, in essence, don't trust the form. It can turn into a trap. So he broke away from traditional schools and created his own style, Niten Ichi Ryu, not as another rigid system, but as a way to act fully in the present. His style was fluid, changing with the terrain, the opponent, the weather, the moment. If your opponent is tall, attack from below. If he is fast, delay him. If he is patient, provoke him. If he is strong, deceive him. The Book of Five Rings. You can only do that if you move like water, unattached but aware. Adaptation, a spiritual intelligence. Real adaptation isn't just tactical, it's spiritual. It's the ability to not cling to a fixed identity. Musashi didn't define himself with, "I am this," or "I only fight that way." He watched the moment, listened to the situation, and answered with clarity. That goes far beyond the battlefield. It's a way of being. In a feudal society full of rigid roles, strict hierarchies, and unquestioned traditions, Musashi was a free spirit. He refused to serve a lord, refused dogma, refused limits. He chose to be water, free but focused, gentle but relentless. For him, adaptation wasn't weakness, it was proof of intelligence. As Charles Darwin would later be summarized, it is not the strongest who survive, nor the most intelligent, but those who adapt best. Musashi was that adaptable one, in war, in art, in life. Flexible, not weak. It's crucial to understand. Musashi didn't confuse flexibility with submission. Being like water doesn't mean giving in to everything. It means knowing when to give way, and when to hit like a wave. Water also floods. It carves mountains. It drowns those who underestimate it. That's the power of the symbol. Water is patient, but not passive. It waits, it moves, and when the time is right, it strikes with unstoppable force. Musashi fought this way. Sometimes he started calm, almost passive, watching, reading, then suddenly moved with such speed and accuracy that his opponent never saw it coming. Right action is born from right timing. The Book of Five Rings. Only someone flexible can wait for that moment without panic. Training for fluidity. Training like water demands another kind of discipline. It's not just repeating forms, it's learning to feel. Musashi trained to be present, to sense the other, to understand the rhythm of the fight, like someone hearing the music before dancing. This active awareness is the heart of living strategy. It's what separates someone who just performs, moves from someone who responds to reality. Water, in this sense, is the metaphor for the detachment needed to grow. Those who cling to form, status, and ego sink. Those who can reshape themselves flow. And those who flow survive. Water as a symbol of the clear mind. In Zen, the ideal mind is like still water. It reflects everything, but clings to nothing. Musashi aimed for that. He didn't care about being the strongest or the fastest. He wanted clarity, no inner noise, no hesitation. The spirit should be like the surface of water, calm, but ready. The Book of Five Rings. The real fight happens inside. A mind stuck in fear, pride, or expectation doesn't see the opponent. It only sees its own reflection. Musashi trained to remove everything that clouded his perception. Like a lake that, once it settles, shows the bottom clearly. To see is to win, and only the one who flows lightly can see clearly. The path that never stops water also represents the never-ending path. Musashi never thought of himself as finished. Even near the end of his life, he kept training, writing, practicing. He knew the way has no finish line. You don't arrive, you keep moving, like a river that never goes back to its source. This humility in the face of change is water's greatest lesson. Everything changes, everything passes, everything flows. The warrior who understands this doesn't fight the current. He learns to move with it. Musashi showed that true power is in not hardening. The one who hardens breaks. The one who adapts endures. water takes the shape of what holds it, but never stops being water. It moves around obstacles, slips through cracks, appears where no one expects, invisible but essential, quiet but unbeatable. Be like water, and you will win without forcing the fight. Fire can light the way or burn everything down. The same flame that warms can consume. The same drive that moves us can also blind us. Miyamoto Musashi understood this duality, not by watching from a distance, but by living through it in the heat of real combat. That's why, in the Book of Five Rings, he dedicates an entire section to fire. In this fourth book of his masterpiece, fire represents the energy of attack, initiative in battle, the power of decisive action. But unlike the usual image of wild fury, Musashi makes one thing very clear. Real strength doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity. Your attack should be like fire, fast, clear, inevitable, but never impatient. The Book of Five Rings. In this symbol, we find the idea of drive with awareness, intensity with direction. Musashi shows that acting with force is necessary, but acting in rage is dangerous. Uncontrolled fire burns everything, including the one who lit it, fire that sees in the dark. For Musashi, fire is not just destruction. It is clarity. It is light in the middle of darkness. It is sharpened perception before movement. Attacking, for him, is not just striking. It's seeing the exact moment when the strike becomes unavoidable. A true warrior doesn't rush blindly. He waits, watches, and moves with precision. This waiting is not laziness or fear. It's full attention. Like hidden embers, quiet but ready. Musashi valued what he called the inner timing of the attack, the moment when everything lines up, body, mind, opponent, and space. This connects strongly with Zen. Effective action comes from presence. The Zen master doesn't act out of impulse, but out of total awareness. In combat, like in life, attacking too early can be as disastrous as attacking too late. Musashi learned to trust not emotional impulse, but silent reading of the moment, intensity without losing control. One of the most common mistakes of inexperienced fighters is confusing energy with rage. They shout, charge forward, swing wildly. Musashi saw that as weakness in disguise. To him, rage is a reaction, not a decision, and someone who only reacts is easy to read. Someone who chooses is dangerous. If you attack with emotion, your movement is easy to see. If you attack with clarity, the enemy is defeated before he even notices. The Book of Five Rings. True fire is not blind explosion. It is focused force. The flame that concentrates on one point until it burns exactly what needs to burn. That is the intensity Musashi practiced. Controlled, calculated, effective. He knew that in a duel, anger exposes intention, and exposed intention is exposed weakness. Fire as strategic initiative. In the Book of Five Rings, fire also represents initiative, the moment you break balance and take control. In a fight, that means attacking while the enemy is still trying to understand what's happening. Not out of panic, but out of superior reading of timing. Musashi called this breaking the enemy's form, not letting him settle into his rhythm. But this initiative doesn't come from being in a hurry. It comes from quiet observation, from noticing small details, breath, posture, hesitation. Then, when everything aligns, fire moves. Here he meets Sun Tzu's idea from the art of war. Victory goes to the one who strikes when the enemy is unprepared. The strike is not just physical, it's mental, psychological, strategic. A clean cut in time, delivered at the right instant. Musashi didn't swing randomly. He chose moments that were already his. Fire that doesn't cling. Another key point for Musashi. Fire must pass. It is a surge, not a permanent state. It serves to break through, not to live in forever. The one who stays constantly in attack mode lives out of balance. Musashi understood there is a time to strike and a time to withdraw. Knowing this is maturity. It is what separates a warrior from someone who only destroys. This echoes Stoic thought. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to become like your enemy." A conscious attack doesn't turn into hatred. It is clean, precise, necessary, and when it's done, it stops. Musashi struck like someone fulfilling a duty, not like someone enslaved by emotion. Inner fire. Breaking your own inertia. Fire is not only about hitting an opponent. It's also about overcoming your own paralysis. It is the force that pulls you out of fear, doubt, laziness, that pushes you to act when your mind wants to delay, avoid, or hide. Musashi knew the worst defeat is letting your spirit stagnate. The warrior who trains but never tests himself, who thinks but never does, who dreams but never moves, is slowly putting out his own flame. That's why he trained daily, fought often, created, wrote, walked. Action was part of the path. Fire was the reminder that life demands movement. This side of fire echoes Nietzsche's idea. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Musashi recognized the chaos, but turned it into clear action. Conscious destruction, fire burns, and sometimes it needs to. Old habits, empty certainties, useless beliefs. Musashi knew that to evolve, you have to destroy what's already dead inside you. For that, fire is essential. Destroy what no longer serves. Cut what is no longer the way. This is fire as purification, not revenge, not cruelty, but release. Musashi didn't hesitate to abandon styles, challenge traditions, cut ties, because he saw that anything that doesn't renew itself holds you back. To move forward, sometimes you have to burn the bridge. Not to trap yourself, but to stop looking back. Musashi's fire was not hatred. It was awareness on fire. It was the light showing where to cut. The heat burning away hesitation. The force breaking fear and revealing what is real. To attack in rage is to dance blindly inside the blaze. To attack with clarity is to light the exact flame needed and let it go out the moment the work is done. In the fourth book of the Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi writes about wind, the most subtle, shifting, hard-to-grasp element. But it's exactly in this lightness that one of the deepest lessons of the path appears. Study others, observe their styles, but not to copy, to surpass. Wind, in Japanese, is keize. It blows from every direction. You don't see it, but you feel it. Wind is what comes from the outside. Other people's styles, inherited traditions, established ways of thinking. And yet Musashi teaches that studying these external forms is essential. Not so we become like others, but so we understand ourselves better. In the way of strategy, to know other styles is to understand yourself. The Book of Five Rings. Here, wind is not what carries you away. It's what blows over you so you can see who you are, whether you resist blindly or let it pass through you with awareness. Wind as a metaphor for the other Musashi was not the kind of warrior who ignored his opponents. On the contrary, he watched them with precise attention. He studied how they walked, how they stood, how they thought. But he did this without worship, without fear, and without the urge to imitate. For him, famous schools, traditional styles, and revered masters were all just forms. And form alone is no guarantee of truth. Musashi faced the finest schools of his time. He fought the Yoshioka, defeated Sasaki Kojiro, and studied Kenjutsu in all its variations. His conclusion was clear. The path is not found by repeating. It is found by reflecting. Wind is what blows from the outside in, not as an invasion, but as a mirror. Study, don't copy. Musashi was harsh toward what he called unconscious copying. To him, following a style without deeply understanding it is like memorizing words without knowing what they mean. Copying freezes growth. Blind imitation makes you dull. If you only move inside what's already defined, you'll never be truly free. He who only imitates will never understand the moment. In combat, that's fatal. Musashi knew a predictable fighter is always one move away from defeat. So he studied others not to reproduce their moves, but to see where they were limited. He looked for openings, blind spots, habits, and through that, learned more clearly what not to do. This idea lines up with Kant's view that living only by external models is giving up your own autonomy. Musashi brought that into the body. A true warrior thinks, feels, and acts from himself first, and only then chooses what to adopt. The other as a mirror. By studying other styles, Musashi wasn't just trying to beat them, he was trying to beat himself. Because in the end, every opponent is a part of us we haven't mastered yet. The other's hesitation exposes our own doubts. The other's technique shows us where we're stiff. The other's strategy forces us out of comfort. That friction makes awareness grow. This view is deeply Stoic. Epictetus taught that the outer world is training ground for the soul. The other isn't just there to be defeated, but to reveal us to ourselves. Musashi knew that. Fighting others was facing himself in a different shape. In this way, wind stops being a threat and becomes an invisible teacher, a critique of dead tradition. In feudal Japan, tradition was everything. Sword schools were treated almost like religions. Styles were taught as dogma. Students didn't question. They obeyed. Musashi broke from that. He saw clearly that tradition without reflection is a cage. For him, wind was the reminder to listen to the world without losing yourself in it. He studied schools, respected masters, but never surrendered his own judgment. He understood that every style was once an innovation, but over time can turn into repetition. This echoes Nietzsche's warning that culture, followed blindly, can kill creativity. Musashi didn't reject the past. He refused to be trapped in it. The way must be alive, he said, and for it to be alive, it has to change, breathe, and experiment. Wind as a force of renewal. Wind is also what shakes things loose. It blows away dust. It hits your face and forces you to blink or look differently. Musashi knew that to grow, he had to let the unknown in. That's why he traveled. Why he fought different schools. Why even after creating Nitanichi Ryu, he didn't lock himself inside it. He knew the path cannot stop, and wind, restless by nature, is the symbol of constant renewal. In Zen, there is Shoshin, beginner's mind, a mind that never closes, even after decades of practice. Musashi kept that mind. Wind was his reminder that anything too fixed needs to be shaken. Know to transcend. The final lesson of wind is simple. Know others so you can know yourself. Study. Watch. Question. But don't chain yourself to what you find. The other is necessary, but not your limit. Musashi shows that the true path is one where outside knowledge is used with discernment. It's not enough to know what others do. You must know why you do what you do. Just as the wind moves leaves but doesn't own them, other styles should move and inspire you, not control you. The sword should be held by an awake mind, not by a dead habit. Musashi listened to the wind, but didn't let it carry him away. He let other styles pass through his awareness like breezes that clear the air, not storms that tear him apart. To know others is strategy. To understand yourself is power. To unite both is invincibility. There comes a point on the path when technique is gone. No form, no intention. The blade moves, but not because the mind forces it. The body acts without anticipation. Awareness is awake, but quiet. This is the moment when the warrior stops fighting and simply is. Here, at the end of the Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi gives his most enigmatic, profound teaching. The void. The void is where nothing exists, but also where anything can emerge. Musashi, the Book of Five Rings. The void is the fifth and final element. It isn't another stage of combat. It's the peak of the spiritual journey. while the other books cover foundation, earth, flow, water, initiative, fire, and understanding others, wind. The void stands beyond opposites. It's the end of chasing victory. It's the birth of total presence. What is the void? Musashi doesn't define the void with neat words, because it can't be explained. It can only be lived, but he points to it. The void isn't nothingness. It's the state where ego fades, where there's no fear or craving, where movement flows without effort or intent. In the void, there is no thinking, only perception. This idea is rooted in Zen Buddhism, which shaped the samurai and martial arts of Japan. In Zen, there's Mushin, no mind, and Fudoshin, an unshakable spirit. That is the void, the state where the warrior no longer tries to win, defend, or show off technique, but simply answers the moment with purity. Winning without trying to win over his life, Musashi won more than 60 deadly duels. He was feared, respected, studied. But the height of his art wasn't victory. It was reaching a place where winning or losing no longer mattered. The void is where intention disappears, not because the warrior is indifferent, but because he has gone beyond the win-lose split. The one who seeks victory is always tense. The one who acts from the void is at peace, even in chaos. This echoes Taoism's Wu Wei, action without forcing, in harmony with reality's flow. Musashi didn't use those words, but he lived them. In the void, the sword seems to cut by itself. The body moves with the world. There's no calculation, only clarity, no strategy, just spontaneous response. The end of form. To reach the void, you have to pass through all the other elements. The warrior who tries to jump straight there, without base, training, or hardship, falls into illusion. Musashi wasn't a mystic who dismissed practice. The opposite. He trained obsessively, repeating movements until the body breathed them. But he knew form is only the beginning. Technique is just a bridge. And in the end, form must be set aside so spirit can act. Master technique, then forget it. Only then can you act truly. Bruce Lee said something similar. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. Both understood that truth can't be taught, it's revealed through full presence. Silence as wisdom. Musashi spent his final years withdrawn, choosing a cave over the court. There, with no audience, no battles, no applause, he wrote and faced what's essential. That wasn't renunciation. It was the natural result of his inner journey. In the cave's silence, he met the void and saw that everything that truly matters rises from silence, from no mind, from the space between thoughts. The void is the meeting point of wisdom and action. It isn't passivity. It's pure potential, free of noise. Zen masters say, the sound of the void is louder than 1,000 words. Musashi lived that. His sword said less than his silence. His greatest teaching isn't in the cuts he made. It's in the clarity he found. When the mind quiets, life speaks. We live in noisy times. Inner noise, anxiety, comparisons, hurry, fear. Outer noise, distractions, opinions, endless stimuli. Musashi offers a way back to center. He shows that to act truly, you must quiet the noise. Go beyond mental strategy, beyond emotion, beyond wanting. And beyond that lies the void. In the void, the warrior is no longer split. He doesn't think, should I attack? He doesn't worry, what if I lose? He simply is. He becomes the strike. He becomes the moment. He becomes the way. This fusion of doer and doing is the heart of Heidegger's idea of authenticity, being fully present in what is. Musashi anticipated it through silent practice. The path ends and begins again. Reaching the void didn't make Musashi passive. He didn't abandon the world. He just stopped fighting against it. People often get this wrong. They think the void means disconnecting, fading out, losing interest. Not at all. The void is fullness, action without ego, effortless movement, life without illusion. And when the warrior arrives there, the path doesn't end, it changes shape. He no longer fights for recognition or defense. He acts because he is alive. He trains because he is present. He walks because there is nowhere he needs to arrive. Musashi reached the void, not as an ending, but as a return to essence. The sword slid back into its sheath. The brush came to rest. The sound fell away. And what remained is what was always there, the silence that holds everything. In the void, there is truth. In the void, there is the way. When a warrior has lived long enough that he no longer seeks to defeat opponents, only to understand, that's when it's time to write. For Miyamoto Musashi, that moment came shortly before his death. In 1645, already living in seclusion in the Reigando cave, he wrote the Dokudo, a title that can be translated as The Way to be Followed Alone, or The Path of the Lone Wanderer. It's made of 21 principles, acts of austerity, discipline, and detachment that reflect a life shaped by combat, art, solitude, and one deep desire to die in peace, without illusion, without weight. The moment of letting go, Musashi didn't write these rules when he still had something to prove. He wrote them after giving away his belongings, stepping back from titles, and leaving jewels behind. He knew his time was short, and in that shrinking of the outer world, he saw what truly mattered. It's important that the Dokudo was written near his death. It isn't a manual for victory, but a final testament of presence. Not about glory, about wisdom. And that wisdom comes in simple lines, short, strict, direct, because at the end, life demands clarity. The harsh honesty of the principles. Each of the 21 principles carries the tone of someone who no longer fears much, and no longer craves much. There is stoic coolness, ascetic detachment, and the hardness of someone who has watched time consume everything. For example, accept everything as it is. Do not desire. Do not fear. Do not depend. These aren't soft suggestions. They're commands for those who have seen how fragile all certainties are. They're reminders for those who want to die in peace. Meaning, without regret, without resentment, without clinging to an endless past or the illusion of control. The existential meaning. At the center of these principles is a major insight. Freedom is born from letting go. When Musashi says, "Do not fear death," he's not pushing recklessness. He's pointing to the truth that death is part of the way. Ignoring that means living under the shadow of fear, and fear destroys clarity. When he says, "Do not be guided by lust or love," he's not denying love. He's warning that no attachment should rule us so completely that it blinds our judgment. A complete warrior can love, but does not become a prisoner of what he loves. When he writes, "Never stray from the way," he's not talking about dogma, but integrity, living in line with yourself, even when everything around you pulls the other way. In the end, the path belongs only to the one who walks it. Practical application. Today, these 21 lessons may seem too harsh, too severe, but Musashi didn't write for those seeking comfort. He wrote for those seeking clarity, for people who understand that life isn't just about beating an opponent, but overcoming themselves. He offers directions such as, accept the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Don't make pleasure your goal. Your goal is understanding. Don't base your life only on passing feelings. What is partial is unreliable. Think less of yourself and more deeply about the world. Fear of yourself keeps you frozen. Let go of greed, envy, and attachment, because all of them chain the soul. These aren't slogans. Each principle carries pieces of his story. Killing in a duel at 13, wandering the roads of Japan, refusing to serve any lord, living as an outsider, retreating to a cave, and writing the Dokudo at the end. The paradox of conscious solitude. The way to be followed alone doesn't mean lonely suffering. It means taking responsibility for yourself. The one who walks alone is not dragging other people's expectations, only the truth he found. Musashi teaches that conscious solitude is not being empty, it is being whole. You reach that wholeness only when you let go of what you depended on to feel complete. Fame, teachers, fixed styles, applause, when you choose silence, as he did, in the cave, as he recorded, in the dokodo. Dying in peace. Dying in peace doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means the absence of illusion. Musashi accepted that death would come. He accepted that nothing is permanent. He accepted that even he, the undefeated duelist, would die. And so he wrote, "Do not fear death." That acceptance is the peak of his philosophy. Once you accept death, life becomes lighter. The focus shifts from "what can I gain" to "how can I be?" The sword stops being just a weapon and becomes a tool of awareness. Art stops being decoration and becomes expression. The dokodo, with its principles, becomes a guide for both life and death, a way to walk all the way to the end, with dignity, clarity, and presence. Even if you're not a swordsman or wandering warrior, Musashi's voice reaches you. We all carry fear, attachment, illusions of control, hunger for approval. The dokodo calls us to the hard work of owning ourselves, instead of partnering with our weaknesses. When he says, "Do not hoard weapons or practice more than is useful," he warns against excess, of things, of titles, of expectations. When he says, "Do not live by other people's approval," he demands inner independence. And when he says, "Never stray from the way," he reminds us that the way is not a moment. It's a process. It's in every day, every choice, every sacrifice. The dokodo is Musashi's farewell song, not of bitterness, not of glory, but of freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from illusion, freedom from living on repeat, freedom to live and die as a whole person. Accept everything as it is. Live with clarity, stay on the path, and die in peace. Miyamoto Musashi lived with death at his side, not out of morbidity or a desire to die, but as a constant companion. A clear reminder that every moment is unique. That deep awareness of mortality freed him. It allowed him to act fully, be completely present, and understand that his philosophy was never about killing, but about living as if every action could be the last, living with death at your back. From his teenage years on, Musashi walked on the edge of the blade. After winning his first duel as a boy, traveling as a wandering swordsman, refusing to serve any lord or cling to fixed schools, he chose a path where death could appear at any moment. That conscious risk didn't make him anxious, it made him alert. Samurai tradition valued the resolute acceptance of death. Musashi embodied this principle and turned it into a living practice. When you don't fear death, your actions stop being self-affirmation and become pure action. Death as training in presence. For most people, death is either terrifying or ignored. For Musashi, it was a tool. He saw that fear of death numbs a person. It blocks clarity, creates hesitation, and makes you miss the moment. So in his philosophy, death wasn't some distant possibility, it was a constant reality. In his final work, Dokodo, The Way to Be Followed Alone, written shortly before his death in 1645, one of the principles is, "Do not fear death." No, that line sums it up. Accepting death is freeing yourself from paralysis. When the body knows it can die, it stops clinging to the safety net and acts with freedom. Acting as if it were the last moment, Musashi believed every action should carry the weight of "this could be the last time," not in a dramatic or depressive sense, but in terms of commitment. If you swung your sword, trained, painted, or spoke as if it were the last time, you'd put your whole being into it, instead of holding back. In that way, daily practice, duels, training on the road, and silence in the cave all became rituals of presence. Combat stopped being just a technical exercise and became an expression of fully awake living. Dying inside before dying outside, Musashi understood that real death often comes before the physical one. The death of illusion, vanity, ego. When a warrior dies to his ego, He stops chasing glory, recognition, or permanence. He accepts impermanence, and that inner death puts him in a unique position to act freely. This connects with the Stoic idea of memento mori, remember you will die, used not to depress, but to wake people up to a more honest life. Musashi lived that idea in a martial, existential way, training not just the sword, but the human condition. Wholeness in action. Once you accept death, there's no space left for hesitation. Time becomes sharper. Your opponent is clearer. The ground, your body, the moment, all stand out. Musashi reached that threshold. In the void, the final element in his Book of Five Rings, the warrior doesn't think, "How do I win?" He is simply present. That's only possible when there is no hidden fear, no constant need for self-protection. Death, no longer just a threat, becomes a catalyst for strength. The one who does not fear death will be unbeatable. A common interpretation of Musashi's teaching. An ethic of death, not romanticizing it. Important, Musashi was not suicidal. He wasn't looking for death. He lived as if death were already beside him, so his actions could be complete. Death was a consequence, not a goal. His ethic runs against fanaticism, against those who seek death for glory. For Musashi, glory meant nothing. What mattered was staying clear-minded to the end. Freedom in finitude. Accepting death gives a radical kind of freedom. You stop living for a vague someday and start living for now. In his later years, Musashi wrote that a true warrior should be able to give up everything, body, reputation, legacy, as long as he kept his honor and presence. Honor, for him, wasn't fame. It was consistency with his own way. By living with a constant awareness of death, he freed himself from the need to protect an image. He trained, painted, and wrote without chasing applause. His final work, the Dokudo, was written with full awareness that nothing would last. Practice of letting go and offering yourself. Near the end of his life, Musashi gave away his belongings, left his home, and chose the Reigando cave to live in simplicity. He offered himself to existence in its rawest form. This wasn't resignation, it was preparation, a way to face the end with dignity. Practicing death was also practicing detachment. Lessons for today. Even though Musashi lived in a world of swords and duels, his lesson fits our time. Accept your mortality. Knowing time is limited clarifies what truly matters now. Act fully. Treat each task, relationship, and moment as if it might be the last. Not out of panic, but out of presence. Train body and mind. Don't wait to feel ready. Train so you can meet the moment when it comes. Let go of what doesn't matter. Fame, possessions, expectations are unstable. Keep your integrity to the end. Living well includes dying well, not as a show, but as a conscious surrender. Musashi died in 1645. A few weeks before, he wrote the Dokudo and dedicated it to his disciple. His last battle wasn't against an outer enemy. It was against what holds all of us back, endlessly postponing truly living. He teaches that dying well starts with living well, that practicing life is also practicing death, and that once you accept death, your whole life becomes brighter. Musashi saw strategy as the art of reading the world. Someone who masters the sword can also master business, politics, and themselves. For him, the world is a battlefield, and anyone who doesn't think strategically will always be defeated. From early on, Musashi realized that sword skill alone wasn't enough. You had to understand the environment, the opponent, timing, and space. In his main work, the Book of Five Rings, he clearly states that once you understand the way of strategy, there will not be a single thing you cannot understand. That line is the key to his philosophy. Strategy isn't limited to the battlefield. It applies to all of life. Strategy beyond the sword. After many duels and years of wandering, Musashi concluded that martial arts were just the means. The real goal was learning how to respond to the world with awareness. He said that the way of strategy was really the way of all things. In other words, just as, with the sword, you pay attention to movement, breathing, and timing, in life you pay attention to events, changes, the weaknesses of others, and your own. He said that seeing the way in all things was a core part of the wisdom he gained. So for Musashi, mastering the sword was only the beginning. Mastering yourself, your mind, impulses, and attachments, and mastering your surroundings was the real victory. The world as battlefield Musashi lived in a Japan torn by war, rivalries, duels, and instability. But he saw that even away from war, life was still a kind of battle, not necessarily against another armed man, but against circumstances, fear, time, and your own limits. For him, anyone who does not think strategically will always be beaten, because brute strength or technical skill alone are useless if you can't read the terrain, anticipate movement, and adapt to the unexpected. He learned this both in combat and in reflection. To him, strategy was a holistic art, integrating body, mind, environment, and situation. Yes, master the weapon, the style, the form, but above all, master the changing reality around you. Practical uses. From business to personal life, Musashi didn't write only for warriors. He made it clear that strategy applies to trade, politics, art, and everyday life. He practiced calligraphy, drawing, sculpture, and saw in all of them the same principles he used with the sword. For example, he said you shouldn't cling to just one weapon or one style. Just like in business, you don't depend on a single product or method. Adapt, innovate, and shift with the situation. That's the principle. He taught that you should study other styles in the Wind chapter of the Book of Five Rings, not to copy them, but to understand their limits and use that to your advantage. In politics or business, that means observing competitors, markets, and context isn't dirty play. It's strategy and more. Training every day, being solid like earth, fluid like water, decisive like fire, observant like wind, and reaching the void. All of that shows that strategy is not just for combat. It becomes a way of living. The strategist's mindset. Musashi stressed that a strategist's mind doesn't freeze and doesn't get carried away by emotion. He said, in strategy, your spirit must be the same as your everyday spirit. In other words, thinking strategically doesn't mean being tense or paranoid all the time. It means being prepared, attentive, and present. Advantage comes from clarity, anticipation, and adaptability. He also wrote, in strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close, and to see close things as if they were distant. This shows that a strategist needs to see both the big picture, the war, the market, the environment, and the immediate detail, the opponent, the move, the gesture. That double vision, macro and micro, is essential for victory. Self-mastery as a condition for strategy. For Musashi, you can't master the outside world without mastering your inner world first. If a warrior is controlled by fear, hate, attachment, or vanity, his strategy falls apart. The way of strategy includes self-knowledge, detachment, and calm. Without that, your weapon and technique are wasted. Living as if each action were the last, as he teaches elsewhere, lets you act without regret, fully present. That habit builds a mind that can read the situation without hesitation. A practical example of life strategy, Musashi refused to serve feudal lords for convenience. He refused external dependence. That wasn't just pride, it was strategy. He knew that if he tied himself to a lord, he'd lose flexibility, be bound by expectations, and his freedom to follow his own way would be damaged. That choice may sound distant from our lives, but the principle is universal. Whoever depends too much loses power. This applies to jobs, partnerships, and systems. Strategic freedom requires some independence, not isolation, but not total surrender either. The legacy for our time today, in business, careers, marketing, and politics, many people chase shortcuts and magic formulas. Musashi reminds us that real strategy is continuous, practical, and applies everywhere. Train like earth, adapt like water, act with clear force like fire, study others like wind, and reach the void, not just in combat, but in projects, relationships, and decisions. He teaches that life is a battle, not because we must live in constant conflict, but because we must live in constant awareness. Challenges change, opponents change, environments change. Only those who keep thinking, adapting, and observing don't just survive, they grow. For Musashi, strategy wasn't just tactics, it was a philosophy of life. Seeing the world clearly, acting consciously, training always, adapting, and mastering yourself. He shows that someone who can master the sword can also master business, politics, and their own life, as long as they understand that the sword is just a symbol, and strategy is the essence. The world is a battlefield, not always bloody, but always demanding. And those who don't think strategically will always be defeated, maybe not by swords, but by irrelevance, stagnation, and blindness. Once you understand the way of strategy, there will not be a single thing you cannot understand. Musashi. In his own time, Miyamoto Musashi was already known as an unbeatable swordsman, creator of the Niten Ichi Ryu style, and author of strategy texts like the Book of Five Rings. But what makes him truly stand out is not just his skill with the sword, it's how he brought together fighting, art, writing, reflection, solitude, and daily practice into one way of living. He became the archetype of the warrior philosopher, someone who doesn't just try to defeat external enemies, but aims to master himself, understand the world, and act according to an inner truth. In this sense, Musashi represents less a model of combat and more a model of existence. A person who lives by the way as a continuous practice, who faces conflict, both inner and outer, and seeks detachment and clear awareness. The sword becomes a metaphor, the duel becomes a lesson. Art becomes an extension of his being. This archetype matters in any era because it expresses something universal, the effort to live fully alive, without splitting life between action and thought, between being and doing. The direct way of practice. Musashi rejected servitude, fixed styles, and stagnation. His wandering life, his duels, the creation of his own style, his refusal to submit to any lord or school, all of it points to the primacy of direct practice. He didn't wait for perfect wisdom before acting. He made action itself the path. For him, a warrior could not simply imitate forms. He had to experience. As he writes in the Book of Five Rings, "When you understand the way of strategy, there will not be a single thing you cannot understand." That line reveals a core belief. Combat, practice, and experience are not ends in themselves. They are ways to understand everything more deeply. The archetype is clear. The warrior philosopher who learns through fighting, lives while thinking, and turns every action into reflection. One of the things that makes Musashi convincing as an unofficial philosopher is that he faced much more than armed opponents. He faced himself. The inner conflict, fear, vanity, attachment, pride, was as much a battlefield as any duel in the open. Musashi saw outer struggle as a mirror of inner struggle. In the Dokudo, he lays down principles like, do not desire, do not fear, do not depend. These aren't rules for defeating enemies, they're instructions for overcoming the ego. In that sense, he perfectly fits the warrior philosopher archetype, the one who knows the real enemy is not out there, it's in here. For him, the way wasn't theory, it was embodied. Every duel, every mile on the road, every moment of silence in the cave, every brushstroke was part of one single movement, waking up to what we are and acting fully. This way of life cuts through the split between practical life and contemplative life. For Musashi, there were not two ways, only one: live with full awareness. The warrior philosopher archetype demands detachment from empty honor, from others' approval, from rigid technique, from dead forms. Musashi chose to live away from lords, wrote in solitude, gave up comfort, He taught that only those who accept death, literal or symbolic, can act with total commitment. That renunciation is not a denial of life, it's the opposite. When you let go of the obsession with results, glory, and fear, a huge freedom appears. The freedom to be fully present. The warrior philosopher fights not just to win, but to wake up. Musashi embodied this. Sword practice became life practice, painting, calligraphy, sculpture, all extensions of a person training to see, hear, act, and exist with clarity. Beyond time and culture, Musashi lived in feudal Japan, but the archetype he represents goes far beyond that setting. He is the person who refuses to live only for convenience, who seeks truth through action, who understands that the world is a battlefield, not necessarily against others, but against distraction, illusion, and ego. He shows that life demands strategy, not only to survive, but to live with meaning. He says that someone who masters the sword can also master business, politics, and themselves. This warrior doesn't need a literal sword. He carries attention, presence, and intention. This archetype speaks to entrepreneurs, artists, thinkers, and anyone who doesn't want to just drift through life, but dive into it consciously. Musashi is unusual because he united body, mind, and spirit in a rare way. He wasn't just a technician, he was a thinker. Not just meditative, he was active. Not just an artist, he was a warrior. As one study puts it, Musashi's philosophy goes well beyond simple swordsmanship, killing, and a focus on winning. He felt that the way you approach life and the way you meet death matters. He saw martial arts as a complete practice of existence, and that is the mark of the warrior philosopher, not dividing life into separate boxes, but living as if every moment were combat, art, and contemplation at once. What can we take from this archetype today? Live through practice. Your battlefield might be work, relationships, or daily decisions. The question is, are you really living or just passing through? Inner conflict matters as much as outer conflict. True mastery is not just beating others, but overcoming yourself. Detachment and presence. Freedom comes when results stop controlling your actions. Life as strategy. See the world as part of your path, not just a stage you wander on. Integration. Don't split body, mind, and spirit. Bring full attention to everything you do, big or small. Miyamoto Musashi didn't become a symbol just because of his victories or sword style. He became a symbol because he lived the way in all its dimensions. He is an archetype because he shows that the warrior exists in each of us, the one who fights to wake up, who loves both art and the blade, who meditates in silence and trains with discipline, who lets go in order to be whole, who understands that living well is fighting with awareness. More than a samurai, Musashi became a synthesis of practice, philosophy, and freedom. His way doesn't end in victory, it ends in presence. He is the warrior philosopher who fights to awaken. And if we choose to walk in the shadow of his example, maybe we can also fight, not to defeat others, but to awaken ourselves. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with us through another part of Musashi's path. His story isn't just about swords and victories. It's about courage, awareness, and transformation. And if any of this spoke to you, then it was already worth it. Now, I want to invite you to keep going on this journey. If you liked this video, hit the like button. It helps the channel reach more people who are also looking to reflect and grow. Comment down below, which part of Musashi's story hit you the hardest? Have you ever gone through an inner duel that changed your life? And of course, share this video with someone who might need this message. Sometimes, a story like this can help wake someone up to their own path. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We're building a community that brings together philosophy, history, and self-knowledge. There's a lot more coming. Videos about great thinkers, warriors, ethical dilemmas, and much more. Stay with us, check out the other videos on the channel, and let's keep walking the path together. See you next time.